This is the key to your listeners out there. You've got to release your finances. There's power in releasing. And once you release your finances to God, the multiplication comes in.
Well, hey guys, and welcome back. I get to interview people from all over the world. That is really fun for me to talk to. And then, of course, you guys just get to listen in. And that is my selfish agenda with the podcast, is to myself go and meet great people, great generals in God's army, especially in the marketplace. And my guest today, well, you're just going to love it. He's a man of faith. He's a huge man of generosity. He's got a great business behind him, and we're going to explore all of those things. So, Phil, it's so good to have you on the podcast. Why don't you tell our listeners who is Phil Liberatore?
Well, Phil Liberatore is a born-again believer, a marketplace apostle, and a kingdom mover. That's who Phil Liberatore, and he's also a CPA and IRS problem solver as well.
Good. So you got two brands, right, that I can see, both I guess in the accounting space, but one your traditional CPA and one IRS problem solvers. We need an Australian version. We need an ATO problem solver business. You need to open a branch here, but basically you can get people out of a pickle with the IRS.
Yes, absolutely. It's really interesting, Wes. When I first started out as a CPA practice, the Lord started directing clients that had IRS issues or tax problems. And little did I know at the time that it was the Lord himself teaching me and training me how to assist clients with issues with their taxes. And after about 11 years, I started a second organization, a second business, called the IRS Problem Solvers. And I got to give all the credit and all the glory to the Lord, because he actually led me into that second business.
Yeah, great. So if you're in a pickle, reach out. Where's your office based?
We're in Southern California. We've got two websites. We've got stopirspain.com and we've got liberatorecpa.com.
Great. So when did you start the business? When was the first one?
The first one, now let me give you a little background on the first one. And I think your listeners will really be encouraged about that, especially ones that are in a transition right now or might be experiencing some type of setback. I was out of work for 6 months, and my wife and I decided in our hearts to continue tithing out of our savings account. Now, down the road, we realized what we were doing. We were planting a seed for the Lord's work to manifest in our life. And 6 months later, I was introduced to a tax attorney, and we were having lunch with him, and he looked at me right across from the table and said, "Phil, I want to help you start your own business." At this point, I was pinching myself because I had sent out 400 resumes, Wes, and I got one interview, and the one interviewer said, "You need to start your own business." And I said to myself, I really need a job. I haven't been working. My savings account is dwindling, and I need this position. I was saying to myself, little to say, he never called me back. And then I met this tax attorney from a friend, and he wanted to help me set up my own business because he had so much tax work. He didn't have enough time for his law work. He says, do all the tax returns and we'll split the fees 50-50 and you can start your own business from there. And that was an absolute harvest from the seed we had sown over that 6-month period out of our savings account.
Incredible. That's just God's faithfulness, hey, all over it. And what year was that?
Well, I'm going to age myself now. That was 1988. We'll be celebrating 35 years in November.
Wow. Well, I was 10. I don't want to age you, but I was 10. And Okay, cool. So, and then today, I mean, I kind of stalk people that I want to interview. So I had a look on some of your videos and Google Maps and so forth. But the office it's got your name written down the side. It's a bit of a big deal. How many people in there now?
We've got 35 people, and we're currently looking for about 5 more. And let me share this with your listeners, because this is where God really shows himself out and shows off. I recently had to renew my insurance policy for the business. And of course, I have to list how many employees and what's my revenue for the year. So the insurance broker calls me. He says, Phil, what are you doing? You're growing. I've noticed the last couple you're growing, but you're not really adding to the employee count. How are you doing this growth? And I have to give all the glory to the Lord. It's supernatural, Wes. It's just God is multiplying through the hands of my team members the work that we're doing. I probably should have at least 10 to 15 more employees, but we're getting it done with what he's given us. And that's a praise report.
Incredible. All right. So obviously you've been a generous, faithful man couple before you even started the business in '88. What role do you think business plays in advancing the kingdom?
Well, I think it's been said, and a lot of your listeners probably heard this, the next great revival is going to take place in the marketplace. And I'm a firm believer of that. And I tell you what, we're a church in the marketplace, because we'll pray for our clients. We'll add them to our prayer list. I have someone in the office following up with phone calls, emails. We even send out notes of encouragement. We'll give out resources. We'll find them churches if they need a new church. So we're functioning primarily as a church, a parachurch in our workplace. And that, I think that's very important for all your listeners out there to really engage their faith into the marketplace.
Cool, because I think, one of the, I don't know what your experience is with more, I guess, US churches, but from what I've seen, one of the kind of messages that has crept into modern day Christianity is there is a separation of business and I guess vocational ministry. And it's almost been, and probably unspoken, but the only real value that business brings is the money you can bring at the end, right? And so, to me, the money's like one element, right, that business has in advancing the kingdom. One of them is the fact that you get to rub shoulders with your team, love on them, pray for them, intercede for them, like all those sort of things. What else? What other value does business bring to the kingdom? How else can we advance the kingdom in business?
Well, absolutely with our finances, Wes. I mean, that's how the kingdom is advanced, is through finances. And it takes the marketplace, it takes the business to fund opportunities that God is presenting to you. I mean, we support a lot of organizations in Southern California here that are presenting the gospel, preaching the gospel, bringing resources to third world countries. We probably have a list of 8 to 10 ministries right now that we regularly give to and we're part of. The biggest one, of course, is the Los Angeles Dream Center. That's our number one charity, and that's our number one heartfelt contribution to this world. And they're just touching individual after individual. There's over 700 individuals living at the Dream Center, including families and foster youth and sex trafficked victims. And it's a 24/7 work, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with that. But the businesses need to fund the kingdom. It was like the Good Samaritan. Everybody passed him up, but he had the resources and the money to help out. And in a way, we're the Good Samaritans for God's kingdom.
I love it. I love it. And it's easy for you to say that because you live it, right? But there'd be some people who still struggle with that. I guess let's go back to the early years when it would have been tougher to live that way. You may have, the desire was probably still there, but the size of checks would have been smaller, I assume. it would have been quite testing, I would think, to, because I guess the challenge for an entrepreneur is, do I invest the money back in the business and scale it? Do I give the money away and advance the kingdom? And how do I steward those two, I guess, calls on my life as an entrepreneur? How did you do that? How did you think through how much to invest to scale and how much to give on a month by month or whatever basis back in the early years?
Well, that's a good question. In the early years, this is really interesting. I'm going to blow you guys away. I literally took Malachi 3:10, and I tested the Lord in my tithes and offerings. And here's how I did it. The Lord expects us to give 10%. I mean, that's the bottom line. Now, anything over and above that, in a way, it's testing the Lord, because you're giving over and above what he requires. And I took a 10-week challenge and I journaled this. And so I gave my 10%, and then I gave an amount over and above the 10% that week. It was a 10-week challenge. And I'm being very serious. It was literally a new client that would come into the office. It was like he had a halo around his head. And the Lord was telling me, I'm giving you this client this week because you're testing me in the tithes and offerings. And it was not only clients. I had a contract with the software company. The salesman came in one of those 10 weeks, tore up my current contract. He says, Phil, I got a deal for you. And it was over 10 times of what that extra tithe and offering was for that week. So it was anywhere from I think the highest was 15 times over and above the offering and tithes that week. So it wasn't as much in the early stages, but I was still giving. So I always like to reflect back to the widow's mite, because the Lord said all those Pharisees and Sadducees gave out of their abundance and they're bragging about it. And this poor widow gave out of everything she had to live on. So the Lord was looking at what was left over, not how much they gave, but how much was left over. And the Lord's going to honor that. Absolutely.
That's amazing. And I love those testimonies. There's not as many around these days, of people that live like that. I don't know if you would know Don Ostrom, right? So, obviously I never met Don. I had lunch with Marlene, with you, like whatever, a few months back. I already had the book on my bookshelf and didn't put two and two together that I had, but that's basically, a man that lived exactly the same way as you. And then you've got guys like Stanley Tam, who sadly passed away a few weeks ago, the American US Plastics Corporation, and he lived exactly the same. And then you've got R.G. Letourneau from the early 1900s, who lived exactly the same way. We need more stories like this.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I even give this challenge out sometimes as well. There'll be some years where I would tithe on what I wanted to make that year. So in other words, on the first Sunday of the year, if I wanted to make X amount, I would tithe 10% of that amount. And then some years, Wes, you won't believe this, it's going to blow you away, I would empty my savings account and just give it as a first fruits offering. And the Lord has never failed me. And you hear the cliche, but it's not a cliche. You can't outgive God.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I'm living and breathing that. And it's just amazing how much he restores back to you and multiplies it.
Cool. So I guess reputation would go out now after all these years of you living like that. And you would get a lot of invitations, I would assume, to support things. How do you decide?
That's a great question. Here's what my wife and I do. We usually like to have a personal relationship with the founder of the ministry or the organization. And then we want to personally get involved with the organization. Somehow be involved in the outreaches or the distribution of materials or products that they have. A lot of times we end up on their boards, and that's when we start giving. We know what's really taking place. We can trust them, and we see it firsthand. Obviously, a lot of your listeners don't have that privilege or opportunity, but that's how we do it, and that's how we give.
I love it. I want to go back to the early years and just look at like the hard work, right? It would have, I mean, when you're a professional services firm, like there's still the work that's got to be done, right? So when you're a 1 or 2 person operation, there's, I don't know, 40, 50 hours of work, and then you've got to run the business. Then you had a family, right? Then you've got to be a husband. And like, I want to go back to those early years and look at, what was the hard work like? And then I kind of want to look at striving versus the grace of God. So how hard were you pushing in those early years?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I started by myself in a conference room, and I was doing it all. And that lasted for more than a couple years. And then slowly but surely, I would add team members to the practice. But I mean, you have to work. I mean, you really got to put the hard work in to get it off the ground. And you've got to honor God in every facet of your life, including your finances. And even after a 10-year period, Wes, maybe some of your listeners could relate to this. We had 5 extreme tests in our lives financially and in the business as well. And it was right before I started the second business. So, I mean, the enemy was out to get us. And I even call them 5 atomic bombs, because each and every one could have taken us out of business. So after all this hard work and sweat and building it up, there was explosions taking place in the background trying to take us out, because we were making impression upon God's kingdom. We were making advances, and of course the enemy doesn't like that. And one of the atomic bombs, I lost my entire savings account to a Ponzi scheme. A second one was the labor department came in and questioned some of the employees' pay, which was totally unfounded. But once the government gets involved, I mean, it's like a shark coming in, and they just won't let go. And then there were several other tests, but each and every one of them could have taken us out. But it was just the steadfast faith and leaning upon the Lord that brought us through.
Yeah, great. And so you were married before all of this. How did you navigate working really hard and staying married? I mean, like that I find to be quite one of the tough areas. Not even when the money comes. I just mean the fact that you're probably working 80 hours a week and then some. Like, what are some lessons for some of the younger guys coming through who might have a family and whatever, and they really want to grow a business and put in the big hours?
Well, it's a great balancing act. I mean, during tax season, we have a tax season here in the U.S. I mean, the taxes are due at a certain date, and then you can get a 6-month extension. So at the beginning of the year, it's very intense, and I'd be working 12, 16-hour day. I remember working until 3 and 4 in the morning a few days, Wes. Early on, I mean, you just had to get the job done. I couldn't afford to add another staff member at that point. It's just blood, sweat, and tears. But at the same time, we had 2 daughters, and I didn't want to miss any of their events or special outings or anything like that. So it was a real tightrope act to balance everything out. Absolutely. But you got to put the blood, sweat, and tears in to get the results and grow the business.
Yeah, and I think it's important for our guys to hear that, because there is definitely a culture that has crept in that's like, if it's hard, it can't be God. Almost like if you're graced for it, it'll be easy. And I can't, my entire Bible is full of people that had a very hard life. So I can't find a biblical example of getting an easy run. And in my own experience, like the favor has come when I'm focused and working incredibly diligently, right? And but I think there's a lot of people who are like, I'll give it 12 months, I'll see what it's like, and then as soon as it's hard for a while, they're questioning whether they should start a new business because apparently the next one's easier, or completely change vocation and become a pastor or something. What would you say to those guys?
Well, 90% of businesses fail in the first year. So the first year is so critical, Wes, to get a business off the ground. But you've got to do your homework, and you got to have things lined up, and you got to have God definitely on your side to help you navigate through some of these issues and challenges as they come along.
Mm. And what are the disciplines that you walk with on a daily basis? What does walking with the Lord look like for you? Reading time, prayer time, family time. What are some of the disciplines that you have now? Because I see your stuff online. I see you on holiday every 5 minutes now. These days, that's what it looks like, and well earned, right? So, but what are the disciplines that you've currently got and you'll hold in the future that help you balance the business and the family and the walk with the Lord?
Well, I do. I read through the Bible. I've been doing this probably 15 or 20 years now. I read through the Bible. I have a prayer journal, and I do that diligently every day. And I also currently serve on like 7 or 8 different boards of ministries. So I'm giving back my time as well as my talents, and of course our finances on the giving part of things. But I work out 3 to 4 times a week. We have regular family time. I've got one married daughter. I got a grandson now, and I've got one single daughter. So we regularly engage in family times once a week. And of course, you got to take your wife out on dates once a week. So it is, you got to balance everything out. You've got to really do all that.
Mm. Yeah, that's good. And when you do your Bible reading, is that a structured plan, or are you led by the Spirit? How do you do your Bible reading?
No, I'm going through a reading plan currently. And then my wife and I tried to take a book and study that together as well.
Yeah, good.
During that time frame.
And looking forward, what do you know about the next 10 years for the business and for you personally and your impact? Have you got some ideas there? Has the Lord kind of shown you what's next?
Yeah, because I've got so many years of experience now, I'm seeing opportunities growing to minister more, not only in the marketplace, but in church settings. And probably money is probably one of the most misunderstood subjects in the church today, as you know. And I really see a great need right now to not only educate, but even in some cases re-educate and breaking this poverty mentality, scarcity mentality, and sharing that God is El Shaddai, the God of more than enough. And I see where I'm going to be mentoring more and teaching more on the subject.
Well, I feel like you just gave us a little glimpse. Why don't you take some time and talk to us about money, wealth, riches, resources? Why don't you just have freedom to talk to us about some of that revelation?
Well, let me share this parable in the Bible, because this tells a lot. Peter was fishing all night long, and he caught no fishes, came back to land, was washing his nets. Jesus tells him, Peter, let me get in your boat so I can teach this crowd on shore, and let me use your boat. Please launch out and I'll start teaching. Well, he does that, and he released the boat to Jesus. And they came back into shore, and Jesus said, launch out into the deep. And he said, well, Lord, I've been fishing all night. I just got back. I got nothing. And he's thinking to himself, I'm the experienced fisherman. You're telling me to go back out. The fish bite at night. There's no fish during the day. And it's morning time. This is what he's saying. It's morning time, Jesus. And you want me to go out. But here's the key. Nevertheless, he listened to Jesus, went back out, couldn't hold all the fish in his boat, had to call his second boat in with his buddies, filled that boat, and the rest is history. They caught the greatest catch of all time, and that's because Peter released his boat. It was an empty, failing boat, Wes. And this is the key to your listeners out there. You've got to release your finances. There's power in releasing. And once you release your finances to God, the multiplication comes in. And the multiplication is in Deuteronomy chapter 8, Deuteronomy. And there's a Hebrew word called rabah. Rabah means multiplication. And you've got to get into God's kingdom principle of giving and releasing, and that's the key, I think, Wes, to people's success is releasing and receiving the multiplication anointing.
Yeah, and you want to get that in you at the earliest stage, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's important.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. And I reckon if you're going to be putting out more and more information on this stuff, then guys, we should get alongside Phil and follow him online and attend the things because he's a practitioner of what he talks about, and that's rare. Phil, there'd be people that are listening to this right now, and they would be early stage in business. They would be questioning everything. They don't have necessarily the big checks. They probably don't have a team. They're probably working really hard. What would you say to them as a word of encouragement?
Well, I tell you, early on, that tax attorney that I was introduced to us and helped me get started, he ended up to be my mentor. So I think the key to someone just starting out is to have someone, maybe not necessarily a business coach, but more of a mentor, someone who's been through it and experienced it and had success in it. I think a lot of times people fail because they haven't have the experience that others that have succeeded have, and they need to plug into someone that they can lean into and learn from and glean from. And it's more than a business coach, it's a mentor, because they could lead and guide you correctly. That's really critical, Wes.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, very, very good. All right. Well, guys, as you've listened to that, there's a lot of wisdom in there, and you're hearing from a man who has lived it out over 35 years coming up soon. So as we always do on the podcast, I want you to go back and kind of put into the comments for me, what's the top one thing that Phil said that jumped out to you? There's no point in listening to a whole podcast if you don't do something with a nugget of information. So what's the top one thing that jumped out to you? Put it in the comments. Phil, that's so good. Obviously, we chatted briefly in the US, and I knew then like you'd be able to bring a lot of value to our guys. You've got the 35 years, you've got the practical application, you've got a good sized business. The Lord's done incredible work for you up to this point, and I'm sure he'll do more.
And there's no retirement. I'm just starting all over again. I'm looking forward to the next 35 years.
You ever been to Australia?
I've been once, yeah. I'll need to come out again, though, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I mean, the weather's nice, like SoCal, so it'll be similar to home, and we'd love to have you over here.
Absolutely, we'll have to plan on that.
Well, guys, that's the end of the podcast. I look forward to seeing you next week.